They had every reason to believe in Shedeur Sanders. Every single reason. They just didn't want to.
Why didn't Shedeur get drafted in the first round? I got 3 reasons for y'all. I spent a lot of time. I was up till 1 a.m. last night really mulling over this decision. Why didn't Shedeur get drafted in the first round? Number 1, he didn't code switch. What do I mean he didn't code switch? Shedeur Sanders did not change his identity or how he comes off for the sake of the decision maker. The problem is he didn't make himself more palatable to decision makers. He just didn't do it. And in job interviews, whether it's the National Football League or any job interview, oftentimes it behooves you to make yourself more palatable to decision makers. Shedeur Sanders did not do that. That's reason number 1. The second reason, his confidence, I believe, it exceeded his perceived ability. That's just real. Y'all ain't gonna like everything I'm saying. It's just real. What do I mean by that? Shedeur Sanders, he didn't work out at the Senior Bowl. He didn't work out at the NFL Combine because he perceived that he didn't have to do that. Well, who else hasn't done that? Cam Ward, but he got drafted in the first round. Jaden Daniels last year, Caleb Williams last year, and Drake May last year, but they all got drafted in the first round. So Shedeur Sanders' confidence level, it exceeded his perceived ability. What other people thought of him was not the same of what he thought of himself. And lastly, people question his NFL ceiling. Let's just be honest. That's what it comes down to. What I love about this show, and I don't know why I forgot this, I'm sitting next to a dude who was a Heisman finalist and went undrafted. So only 3 people were better than my man Chase Daniel in college, yet he didn't even get drafted at all. So people looked at Chase's ceiling and said, oh, it's not that high in the NFL. Shout out to the 14 years you played in the league. Those were the reasons Shedeur fell out of the first round.
Real quick with the code switch, because, like, what does that really mean?
A dude named Rock Carmichael. He played defensive back for the Eagles. Rock Carmichael was told, you need to cut your hair while being in the NFL. And you could ask Rock, a former teammate of mine, a friend of mine, they told him he needed to cut his hair because the picture of him on the far right was how he showed up to the Philadelphia Eagles. But the picture of him on the left was his team photo before he left the Philadelphia Eagles. It wasn't Rock's choice or Rock's doing. Another friend of mine, Earl Thomas, he came into the National Football League with dreads. They told Earl, hey, you would be more marketable if you shaved your dreads. These are just true stories in the National Football League, y'all. That's just all I'm trying to tell y'all. So when I suggest Shedeur didn't code switch, Shedeur did not make himself more palatable to the decision makers.
They think that they're doing something. It doesn't matter. If you point out the stuff on the tape, no, that don't count. If you point to the numbers and be like, well, he threw for 365, nope, that don't matter. If you talk about wins and losses, well, listen, he won more games than everybody, that don't matter. When you talk about, hey, well, listen, you want Aaron Rodgers, but look what he did against the Steelers and the Bengals. You think Joe Burrow's one of the greatest quarterbacks. Why the heck Joe Burrow lose to a team like the Browns at home with nothing to play for? Oh, that don't matter either. See, the reality is, in their mind...
Think about what that actually means. This kid came into the NFL draft with more proof than most quarterbacks in recent memory. Over 4,000 yards, wins against real competition, film that spoke for itself week after week. And still, before he ever took a single snap in the NFL, the doubt was already written. The narrative was already set. The verdict was already in. Not based on performance, not based on tape, not based on anything that actually happens between those white lines. So ask yourself, why did so many powerful people in this league need Shedeur Sanders to fail before he even got a real chance? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer, but we're going to get into it right now.
I said he's right on the money. That's the exact thinking that got Kevin Stefanski fired. Anybody but Shedeur. The unwillingness to want Shedeur to be given an opportunity. And it was obvious. It was obvious from the start, for the mere fact that he jumped up to grab Dillon Gabriel when nobody even had him going in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round. Dillon Gabriel is somebody that you probably could have gotten in the 6th round. Who knows, he might have even went undrafted. And so for the mere fact that he went up and got Dillon Gabriel when he did, that was the writing on the wall. And then on top of that, we saw his expression when Shedeur Sanders got drafted. We saw the level of excitement or lack thereof when Shedeur Sanders was drafted. And that's why Kevin's not here.
Let's start from the beginning, because the story of Shedeur Sanders and the Cleveland Browns didn't start on draft day. It started way before that. And if you pay close enough attention, the signs were always there. When the Browns selected Shedeur Sanders, there was no energy in that building, no excitement, no moment of celebration from the people who were supposed to be building an entire franchise around this young man. The cameras caught it. The expression said everything that the front office would never say publicly. And that right there told you everything you needed to know. Because here is the reality that people keep dancing around. The stats never matched the criticism. The film never matched the doubt. Shedeur Sanders threw for over 365 yards regularly. He won more games than the quarterbacks being hyped above him. He showed up in big moments against real pressure and delivered. But every single time the evidence pointed in his direction, somebody found a but. But he's Deion's son. But it was college football. But 7 games is too small a sample size. But the competition wasn't strong enough. But he holds the ball too long. But his footwork. But. No one expected what would happen next, though. Because this is where the story gets deeper than just football opinions. This is where you start to see something that goes beyond analysis, something intentional. The moment Kevin Stefanski jumped up and grabbed Dillon Gabriel, a quarterback that almost nobody had going before the 5th or 6th round, a guy who realistically could have gone undrafted entirely, that was the signal. That was the front office communicating their position without saying a single word out loud. Think about the business logic of that move. You just drafted Shedeur Sanders. You have a young quarterback with legitimate upside, real college production, in one of the most recognizable names in football. And your response is to immediately go grab another quarterback who had zero buzz, zero draft hype, and zero reason to be a priority pick? That wasn't about football. That was about something else. In the look on Stefanski's face when Shedeur's name was called, that wasn't nerves. That wasn't professionalism. That was a man who didn't want to be there for that moment, and the whole country saw it. But this is where everything changed.
We understand that Dillon Gabriel needed to start. He's going to be 25 by December. He was in college for 6 years, played about 64 games. He's got some experience, and we know he can play, so let's see what he does. That's fair enough. The flip side, however, is this. Why you got Joe Flacco at QB2 when you know it should be Shedeur Sanders? See, this is the stuff that makes you think for a second and say, you know what? Politics. Because Joe Flacco is a stopgap for the young thoroughbreds coming in and making room for them. And he doesn't mind serving the role as mentor and all of that stuff because Father Time catches up to all of us. And he's no longer what he used to be. And so that's just the way that it's going to go. We all know this. Why are we tripping? Why are we acting like Shedeur Sanders doesn't deserve to be the QB2? Why are we acting like we're not going to see this brother before the season's over? Because unless Dillon Gabriel goes out there and play lights out, you know the Cleveland Browns are going to insert Shedeur Sanders at some point, and I think it's going to be maybe not sooner than later, but I don't think it's going to be too late before we see that. So what's the problem? I mean, it's Shedeur Sanders here. Yes, it is Deion Sanders' son. Yes, maybe, just maybe, it should have been a little less talking. I don't have any problem with Shedeur Sanders telling the Baltimore Ravens he didn't want them to pick him because nobody is getting in front of Lamar Jackson, and he knows that. And maybe Deion shouldn't have represented them, or he shouldn't have been saying, you're going to go where I want you to go. If we don't like the team that picks us, then boom. Because we all know that Shedeur Sanders shouldn't have fallen to 144th in the 5th round. We know this. Okay? But in the end, it is what it is, and we can move on from there. All I'm saying is that Joe Flacco has proven to you that there's been a precipitous drop-off. And you really, really want him there holding a clipboard and mentoring the young dudes. You don't want him there as the QB2. Why are you acting like you do?
The reason this attitude that they displaying is the reason Kevin Stefanski is on the first thing smoking. This is the reason Kevin Stefanski got fired.
And so absolutely no doubt about it. And shout out to G. Bush. And this is one of those real shout outs. It's not one of those just to big up somebody to big up somebody. No, G. Bush is holding it down within Cleveland media. And it would be easy for him to tiptoe around situations, to tiptoe around the Shedeur Sanders situation.
Kevin Stefanski is gone now, not because the Cleveland Browns suddenly ran out of patience with losses, but because that mindset, that quiet, consistent, behind-the-scenes resistance to Shedeur Sanders, that attitude cost him his job. When your front office drafts a quarterback and your head coach is visibly unexcited about it, something has to break, and it did. Andrew Berry is still standing, and here is why that matters more than most people realize. Andrew Berry put together one of the best drafts Cleveland has had in 30 years. Pick after pick, he got it right. He identified talent that other teams missed. He built depth. He made smart, calculated decisions that held up over time. And then he drafted Shedeur Sanders in the first round. That tells you where Andrew Berry stands. That tells you he sees what the rest of this league is slowly starting to wake up to. That this kid is not just a story, not just a name, not just an entertainment play. He is a legitimate quarterback prospect with a real future in this league. Now, let's talk about the elephant in that Cleveland locker room, because we can't have an honest conversation about Shedeur's path without addressing Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson is still on that roster, still on that fully guaranteed contract, the first fully guaranteed deal in the history of the NFL, the most guaranteed money ever given to a quarterback at that time. And that contract is sitting right on top of every single conversation about giving Shedeur a real fair opportunity. But here is something that needs to be said clearly. Deshaun Watson was set up to fail from the moment that contract was signed, not because of his talent, not because of his work ethic, but because the NFL made a decision about what kind of example they wanted to make. An outside arbitrator came in and handed Watson a 6-game suspension. 6 games. The NFL looked at that and said, no, not enough. We need more. They came back and hit him with an 11-game suspension. 11 games, coming off a significant injury, coming off 2 full seasons of limited activity. That is not discipline. That is career destruction dressed up in league policy language. And the result? Watson never recovered. His mechanics were off. His timing was gone. The rhythm that made him one of the most dangerous quarterbacks in the league before all of this, it never fully came back. And now his presence on that roster is being used as yet another reason to slow-walk Shedeur Sanders into the starting role he has already earned the right to compete for. This is the part that should make every honest football fan uncomfortable. Because whether you believe in Deshaun Watson personally or not, the pattern is the same. A black quarterback with talent, with production, with real ability to compete at the highest level, and the system finding every possible way to complicate his path. Sound familiar? Now back to Shedeur, because that young man did nothing wrong. He played his game, he put up his numbers, he walked into that draft process with his head high, his confidence intact, and his tape doing the talking. And the media, not all of them, but enough of them, came after that confidence like it was a character flaw, like a quarterback who believed in himself was somehow a red flag.
A lot of the things that I talk about, but I don't do it. My viewership would probably go up because I could get a larger audience if I tiptoed around a lot of situations. But at some point, you got to speak your mind. At some point, you got to say what's on your mind. You got to say what's in your heart, regardless of the views, regardless of the clicks, regardless of how people may feel about it, regardless of where it may put you in the algorithm. At some point, somebody's got to do it. And so shout out to G. Bush for standing on business day after day. But that being said, like I said, he's right.
Meanwhile, every elite quarterback in the NFL history has walked into the building with that same energy, that same unshakable belief, and we call it leadership when it comes from someone else. But this is where things took a turn that nobody saw coming. The voices who stayed honest, the ones inside Cleveland media who refused to tiptoe around the situation, who refused to sugarcoat what was happening right in front of everyone, those voices are being proven right, one by one. It would have been easy to play it safe. It would have been easy to hedge every statement, soften every opinion, protect access and relationships instead of protecting the truth. Plenty of people did exactly that. But the ones who stood firm, the ones who looked at the tape, looked at the numbers, looked at the pattern and said, this is not right, they are still standing. And here is the part that Jimmy Haslam understands better than anyone in that building. Jimmy Haslam is a billionaire. He did not build that kind of wealth by making emotionally reactive decisions. He understands return on investment. He understands market value. He understands that Shedeur Sanders walking out onto that field as the Cleveland Browns' starting quarterback is worth more to that franchise in ticket sales, in jersey sales, in national attention, in fan energy, in cultural momentum than any amount of resistance from people who just do not want to see it happen. Being a hater does not make you money, it makes you loud. There's a difference. The Browns have 2 first-round picks. They have resources. They have the pieces to build something real. But none of that matters if the quarterback room is a mess, if the culture around the young quarterback is one of quiet sabotage, and if the people responsible for his development are the same ones who never believed in him to begin with. That is why Stefanski is gone. That is why the front office alignment around Barry matters. That is why 2026 is not just another season for Cleveland. It's a reset, a real one. And Shedeur Sanders is at the center of it. Not because of his last name, not because of the entertainment value, not because of social media or culture or anything outside of football. Because the tape says yes. Because the wins say yes. Because every legitimate evaluator who set aside the noise and just watched the man play came away saying the same thing. This kid can play in this league. The Cleveland Browns' best path in 2026 runs directly through Shedeur Sanders as the starting quarterback. Not a backup, not a developmental piece. The starter, the face, the leader of that offense from week 1. And when that happens, and it will happen, every voice that spent the last 2 years manufacturing doubt is going to get very quiet, very fast. Remember who said it. Remember who stayed in the room when it was uncomfortable. Remember who looked at the evidence and refused to let the noise win. The NFL draft wasn't fair to Shedeur Sanders. The media wasn't fair to Shedeur Sanders. The system, in more ways than one, was not fair to Shedeur Sanders. But the game itself, the game does not care about any of that. And Shedeur Sanders is about to remind this entire league what happens when you give a real one his shot. The story is not over, it's just getting started. If this hit different for you, if you felt every word of this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now, because we're going to be right here, every single step of the way, watching this story unfold exactly the way it was always supposed to. Peace and chaos.